Hey guys, I'm back and I have another lecture for you guys today. This one is going to be on the Jackson presidency and the John Quincy Adams presidency, as well as the Van Buren presidency and the shortly lived Harrison presidency. So let's go ahead and discuss this information with you guys. It's mostly going to focus on Andrew Jackson. However, these other presidencies we need to talk about as well. Now, let's go ahead and discuss a couple of things that we talked about last time. So let's go ahead and talk about the market revolution and the infrastructure improvements that were happening during the era of good feelings. So, as far as the infrastructure improvements that we saw happen under Henry Clay's American system, we saw the building up of canals, we saw the building up of the National Road, and subsequently like turnpikes, which are like toll roads. The Erie Canal, would help to speed up transportation out west, thanks to inventions like the steamboat traveling through these canals. Also, we had the invention of the railroads and short line railroads that would help take us to our regional destinations. So all of these infrastructure improvements will prove crucial to the subsequent market revolution that occurred during our first industrial revolution. And during the market revolution, we saw this perfect storm of things happen that got our country more towards creating a national market, and it was all in part thanks to these infrastructure improvements plus the development of the factory system during our first industrial revolution. So things that help out with the market revolution, of course, within the factory system, we'll see interchangeable parts being used, which will help to foster this factory system by making it easier to fix the machinery. We as well have a cheap labor system in place thanks to the immigration happening from Western Europe, mainly from Ireland at this time. Thus, we're going to see a population growth as well, which is we're killing two birds with one stone here, because we're seeing a lot more people to work in our factories, plus a lot more people to buy our factory goods. So, things that are also developed during the market revolution, we have the development of big business, so corporations will be leading the way in some instances within the textile industry, the railroads, and whatnot. Plus, we do have some favorable government actions put in place, especially like these protective tariffs that were designed to make the price of foreign goods a lot more expensive than domestic goods, thus having Americans buy American factory-made items. Now, we also kind of had this laissez-faire type of attitude towards business during the market revolution and the first industrial revolution, which will also help foster, the growth of our factory system and our, industrial might. So all these things kind of played a part into the market revolution. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and set the stage for what we're talking about today. Now, during the Adams administration, we're going to see a couple of things start to happen. America is definitely changing at this time. And a foreign, aristocrat, Alexis de Tocqueville right here, he's French. He decides to visit America during the 1830s. And he makes a couple of remarks on the ever-changing democratic society that Americans live in. So he's amazed by America. He is honestly taken back by how we don't have like a class system, how people can rise up the ranks, how we truly have freedom here in this country. equality is definitely something that a lot of Europeans don't experience. And it is one of our governing principles with our, foundations of government, pretty much. So this whole notion about equal opportunity to go ahead and rise up through the ranks, coming from humble origins and rising up to being a wealthy upper class elite in American society, just took him back. And he thought that, this is amazing about America. So he writes about it. He writes all of these findings. And so really, it's kind of reflective of what's going on at this time, because this is truly the age of the self-made man. And politically, we're going to see that embodiment in the presidency of Andrew Jackson, or rather the political rise of Andrew Jackson to the presidency. And all of this has to do with what's going on with voting at this time. What we see is the expansion of suffrage. And what we mean by suffrage, we mean like voting rights, okay? So throughout the 1820s and 1830s, states across the country are going to expand the right to vote. So what we have, especially in Western states, is going to be this notion of universal male suffrage. And so we're not talking, it's not quite universal male suffrage in the sense that regardless of your race you vote. It's more so regardless of your class. So this is going to include white males. However, remember how a lot of states had put in the property requirements to vote? Well, a lot of those states are going to rescind those requirements. And so what you're going to have is pretty much the rise of the common man, because they're getting involved in politics and they're having a keen influence on the outcomes of elections, especially, the lower classes, because let's face it, they outnumber the elites. What we also see going on, you see that sharp incline of voting. It's because of this. It's because of the universal male suffrage. And voter turnout is going to be rather high throughout the rest of the 1800s. So what we also see at this time is this new notion of party nominating conventions. Because in the past, if you wanted to run for presidency or for whatever, there wasn't what we have nowadays. Well, we actually have the two political parties have a nominating convention, and they pretty much make it official as far as who's going to be their candidate. However, in the past though, the people wouldn't have a direct say-so in who would become the candidate like they do now with the party nominating conventions. So by having these party nominating conventions, we're opening up the political process even more towards the masses. And so they're more democratic in a sense, and of course more popular. We also have the popular election of the president. So states are going to kind of alter how they choose the electors for the Electoral College, and this again will open up participating in politics for the masses. So we're going to see also this notion of popular campaigning, because let's face it, before this time a lot of candidates just kind of ran for office and they ran off of word of mouth. Now we're going to see politicians actively campaign and do what we consider now as traditional politics, where they have these rallies, they campaign in public, give speeches, make appearances. So this is around the time where this actually happens, and now it's become the new normal. So in 1824, one candidate who takes advantage of the rise of the common man and this whole getting the common man involved in politics is going to be Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is one of 4 candidates during the election of 1824. And so This election, if you guys can see, the popular vote and the electoral vote is a hot mess. I mean, there's no like clear-cut winner. So this election gets thrown down to the House of Representatives. And essentially, it comes down to John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Now, notice in the popular vote, Andrew Jackson's winning, right? Same with the electoral vote. It looks like Andrew Jackson's winning, but it's too close to call. So when the election gets kicked down to the House of Representatives, it's up to the members of the House to decide who they're voting for president. And so the Speaker of the House at this time is Henry Clay. Henry Clay doesn't really quite, I guess, trust or like Andrew Jackson. They don't really go hand in hand. So anyways, he decides to push for John Quincy Adams to become president. And so John Quincy Adams ends up winning the election because of the House of Representatives vote. And subsequently thereafter, guess who becomes the Secretary of State? Henry Clay. So the Jackson camp is yelling foul at this. They're like, oh my God, that was a corrupt bargain between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. And thus, the presidency of John Quincy Adams will be marked by this so-called corrupt bargain. If there's anybody who's been groomed to public office, it's John Quincy Adams. I mean, come on, his dad was president. John Quincy Adams was like made for politics. He was important as Secretary of State under Monroe. I mean, come on, he negotiated like treaties plus the Monroe Doctrine, which is the cornerstone of our foreign policy at this time. So, I mean, this guy was totally fit to lead. However, because of that dark stain on his reputation now, because people think he entered a corrupt bargain with Henry Clay, and because during the election, the Jacksonian camp of the Democrat-Republicans, a lot of their followers ended up becoming, part of the House and the Senate. A lot of things that John Quincy Adams pushes during his presidency will not pass. So his presidency is kind of like at a standstill. It's at gridlock. And because he wanted to really like continue Henry Clay's like American system stuff, the internal improvements, the infrastructure improvements and whatnot. Trying to develop a national university, but again, the Jacksonians are going to just say, no, it's a violation of the Constitution. They're really strict on their interpretation of the Constitution, so yeah, they're totally just throwing it out the window as far as like what John Quincy Adams has been proposing. So really, he's only a one-term president. He's going to end up losing this next election to Andrew Jackson. But this election is a pretty nasty election, as was the election of 1824. 1828 is the rematch, and Andrew Jackson's got a chip on his shoulder. He really does, because of what had transpired. So Andrew Jackson, let's go ahead and talk about him a little bit, though. So this guy defies what your normal politician was back then. He's not very well educated. He doesn't come from a rich family. And thus, his political career, even though he does have one, it's not as grand as like the likes of, John Quincy Adams. So he grew up around the frontier, Tennessee. He's known for being courageous and stubborn and just tough. I mean, come on, they called him Old Hickory. So he's going to end up, working his way up the ranks in the military. He's also going to become a lawyer, because back then you didn't have to go to law school or anything like that. Just be a lawyer. And he's going to grow wealthy by speculating with land out west and selling it, buying and selling it. So his time in Congress, he's elected in 1796. But, you know, when the War of 1812 broke out, he was in the military. Of course, he's like this great war hero from the Battle of New Orleans and the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and all this stuff. So, I mean, he's made a name for himself, being tough. Plus, he has quite a scandalous reputation. I mean, this guy gets in more duels than, like, anything. Oh my god. The rumor has it it's like over 100 duels that this guy gets into. So, one famous one was against Charles Dickinson. He calls Jackson a worthless scoundrel and a coward, and Dickinson is like the only person that Jackson truly killed in a duel. But yeah, the fact that he's getting in so many duels is just nuts. Okay? It should kind of tell you what type of character he has. So, despite this, I mean, he is a self-made man. And he is kind of seen as this symbol for the age of the common man and their rise in power. Because he reflects one of them. I mean, he drinks, he swears, he has all of these attributes that the common man had as well. And what they identified with. But truly scandalous part comes from his relationship with his wife, Rachel. She was still kind of married to her first husband when she married Andrew Jackson. Yeah, her divorce wasn't finalized yet. So, I mean, something like that would be scandalous nowadays, guys. Back then, dude, this was whole other level kind of stuff. So he got into a lot of duels, of course, because of his wife too, and trying to defend her honor. Because yeah, people were saying some nasty things about Rachel. And a lot of these nasty things came out during the election of 1828. Again, we consider this one of the most vicious elections during all of U.S. history, let's face it. So, Jackson accuses John Quincy Adams of, like, importing, like, some, American servant to, like, serve the Russian Tsar. So he kind of accuses John Quincy Adams of pimping out people. John Quincy Adams accuses him of, like, murdering people and gambling and slave trade, and even pokes fun at his mom, saying he was a prostitute and that his wife was an immoral woman. It gets so bad that Rachel Jackson, okay, was so traumatized by all the attacks happening on her character that, she up and died during this campaign. Like, straight up, she did. And Andrew Jackson kind of blames John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay and others for, like, stirring the pot and, like, working her up so much to where she got so stressed that she died. So, yeah. I mean, Andrew Jackson was pissed before. He's, like, super pissed now. Like, for real. So, yeah, this was truly a nasty campaign. Now, despite this, though, he ends up winning. You could see there how he splits the popular vote, but takes most of the electoral vote. So, oh yeah, another relic from their campaign here is the Coffin Handbills. These were issued out to be anti-Andrew Jackson, and that little picture in there is supposed to be Andrew Jackson, like, whipping, like, one of his military, like, officers and such. So, yeah, those coffins are supposed to represent soldiers and Native Americans that were condemned and executed by Andrew Jackson during his time in the military. And, I mean, yeah. This is definitely a dig at Andrew Jackson. But, like we said, despite this, Andrew Jackson wins the election. So Jackson's election, like we said, is going to be seen as a victory for the common man. And it even reflects so in his inaugural, like, party ball kind of thing that he has going on here. This dude decides to open up the doors of the White House. Just, like, straight up, like, open them. Say, hey, anybody can come on in. Which sounds pretty awesome, right? But whoa here. This is gonna be, like, dude, okay, let's just put it to you guys this way. There's so many people at this party, so many hillbillies, backwoods country farmers, and just everybody at this party, that Andrew Jackson couldn't even get back into the White House that same night because people were there like all night. He had to sleep in like a hotel in DC. And I mean, it's just so insane that they're gonna have to like bring like the food and drinks and like all this stuff outside just to get people out of the freaking White House. And when they get people out of the White House, I mean, the White House is like tore up afterwards. Like, yeah, big party, tore up. But anyways, yeah, Andrew Jackson, the man of the people, right? So, he is going to do a lot of different things in politics. He's going to have a narrow interpretation of the Constitution. He's going to veto more bills than any of the previous presidents combined. And he kind of triggers a lot of people. Like a lot of people. Because he does expand the office of the presidency thanks to that veto power. So another thing that he does that kind of like some people kind of question is the spoil system. So he sees it as far as like, hey, I'm getting new people involved in politics. How his critics see it is like, hey, you're giving government jobs to people who support you and who are not qualified. So you have like both camps going on this. The spoil system will be around for a while until like the 1880s or so when President Garfield gets shot over it. But yeah, this practice of rewarding your supporters with government jobs, it's not going to turn out that great. Because like we said, it's like you're giving your friend a job just because they support you. But Jackson didn't see it that way. Jackson sees it as like getting more people involved in politics than what was previously. Another thing he's going to do is this whole like rotation of office. So he's going to limit people to one term in office. Like, let's say you're a cabinet member. You're only there for one term. So really, people just have a short amount of time of service within the role that they've been placed in. And it kind of is good because it gets more people involved in politics, but then it's kind of bad too because it doesn't let anybody settle into their role to where they get good at politics and like doing their job. So it's Andrew Jackson's the kind of president that you either love or hate, like for real. Even amongst historians, they're like, you either love the dude or you hate the dude. So, just fair warning, guys, like, Andrew Jackson is different. He is different in that regard. So, for some of you guys, he's going to trigger you. For others, you're going to freaking love him. Okay, let's continue with Jackson. So, what he also has is this kitchen cabinet. And the kitchen cabinet is kind of like his informal advisors. But the dude listens to them probably a lot more than he listens to his actual cabinet. It's like him listening to his bros, like pretty much. So, it's good and bad. Of course, you want to keep people around you that you trust. But then again, I mean, your bros don't exactly know the inner workings of like government. So, yeah. Again, it's one of those things that Andrew Jackson's supporters will love. Andrew Jackson's critics will absolutely hate. So another thing that triggers people, people in this cabinet, is going to be what happens with the Peggy Eaton affair. So here's the deal. Okay, the vice president is John C. Calhoun. His wife, Mrs. Calhoun, is kind of like the ringleader of like the cabinet wives, pretty much. The wives of like the cabinet members. You know, she's the one like organizing like, I don't know, drinking tea and stuff. So anyways, there's this one lady who is the wife of a cabinet member. Her name is Peggy Eaton. She's the wife of the Secretary of War, John Henry Eaton. But she kind of has a scandalous past herself. Some people kind of accused her of like doing some escorting kind of work on the side before she married John Henry Eaton. So she has kind of a shady past. And so John C. Calhoun's wife is like excluding her from these functions that she's having with the other cabinet wives. And of course, like she's getting her, you know, Peggy Eaton's getting her feelings hurt and all that. So Jackson finds out about this. And he kind of has a soft spot for Peggy Eaton because it reminds him of his own wife, who went through like these sorts of things when she was still alive. So he takes it upon himself to like say to his cabinet members, hey, you better like get your wives in check and stop this nonsense. So some of the cabinet members don't take this very well. They take it as Andrew Jackson kind of interfering with their marriage and how they just their relationships in general. Because, I mean, come on, how would you guys feel if somebody, like, up and told, like, your wife or your husband, like, how to deal with you? Like, or vice versa. Like, they told you guys, like, how to deal with your spouse. Some of you guys might not, you know, take kindly to what's being said. So a lot of the cabinet members are going to resign because of this. They're going to be like, nope, no, we're done. And, however, though... the relationship between Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun will, you know, be driven further apart because of this. So, I mean, really, it's kind of like rats leaving the sinking ship, pretty much. These two political cartoons crack me up so much. Like, oh my god. That's supposed to be, okay, on the left-hand side, it's supposed to be Andrew Jackson sitting there, I guess, with John Henry Eaton, who's like a pet rat right there, but yet the rest of the cabinet members are kind of like running away. We see John C. Calhoun over here is like the cat or something chasing the other rats, which is like Martin Van Buren and I forget who the other guys are, but cabinet members. It's the School of Reform, and it's so funny because Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams are totally like peeking through the window of the White House, looking at the craziness that's ensuing. You know, just trolling Andrew Jackson. And even the devil on the altar of reform's like, look at this crazy crap. Kind of just ultimate trolling right there. But anyways, yeah. This is kind of what we see. Like I said, guys, Andrew Jackson, gonna love him or he's gonna trigger you. So, okay. Let's go ahead and talk about the Tariff of Abominations and the Nullification Crisis. So, what happens with this is that in 1828, right at the tail end of John Quincy Adams' presidency, Congress had passed a tariff, so another tax on imports, and this one was the highest rate we've ever seen. I think it was hovering around like 28% or something like that. It was high. So this, of course, benefits northern manufacturers. Southerners don't like it because they're going to have to pay more for, manufactured goods. They liked imports, so, it's going to force them to pay more money. John C. Calhoun, being from the South, is going to be like, you know what? Yeah, this is a bunch of crap. So secretly, he writes this document called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Now, what this document does, it takes a page from that Virginia and Kentucky resolution documents that we talked about earlier that basically said states should have the right to nullify, which means to get rid of, federal laws that they think violate the Constitution. So he's also going to put a different spin on this too and say, hey, states have rights. You know, we should have state sovereignty. So ultimately, with this whole like South Carolina exposition and protest, pushing the notions of states' rights and nullification, it's really going to push a lot of buttons, especially with Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson does favor states' rights, but the whole idea of nullification he is really against. And of course, this sets up a big fight in Congress. So between Daniel Webster and Senator Robert Hayne, they're going to just have it out about this whole like ideal of nullification and such. John C. Calhoun, of course, like, you know, prepping his boy Hayne for the argument. Daniel Webster holds his own. So Calhoun is going to be countered in his arguments by Webster, because Webster is going to basically say that the Constitution is more like a pact between the people and the government, not just the states and the government. John C. Calhoun, of course, is, you know, pushing for states' rights, that states and not the federal government have the ultimate power. So, what Daniel Webster has to say at the closing of his speech is, liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. And you would think that Andrew Jackson would support John C. Calhoun. Andrew Jackson does not. Andrew Jackson agreed with Daniel Webster in this dinner that they had together with John C. Calhoun and others. Jackson goes on to say that our federal union, it must be preserved. And Calhoun, of course, you know, not seeing eye to eye with Andrew Jackson anymore, says, you know what? The union, next to our liberty, most dear. So, kind of like, you know, nudging him a little bit. Calhoun, of course, has already had it with Andrew Jackson. He resigns, and later he's elected as a senator for South Carolina. So, you know, he's back in politics. But in 1832, Congress passes a lower tariff now, just to kind of smooth things over with South Carolina and with John C. Calhoun, but they're not having it. South Carolina passes the Nullification Act because of this, and they threaten to leave the United States if, you know, this tariff doesn't go away. So, because of this move here, this sets Andrew Jackson off. He is angry. I mean, he goes on to say, yeah, you see John C. Calhoun, you better hang him. And with this force bill that is signed by Congress, pretty much it gives Andrew Jackson the authority to send the troops where he wants. And what he wants to do is send them to South Carolina to hunt down John C. Calhoun and others who were proposing this disunion, nullification, like, you know, secession, treasonous thoughts that Andrew Jackson was against. So Andrew Jackson's kind of crazy enough to really do this, to really hang John C. Calhoun. So John C. Calhoun and South Carolina are like, okay, we back down. All right, we're going to follow this tariff. But you see how, like, things kind of go to the extremes with the Jackson presidency. And so with this whole, like, nullification crisis, like, the idea is out there, and southern states are still going to hold on to it, even though, you know, John C. Calhoun and South Carolina back down for now. There's still going to be other southern states pushing this notion that, yeah, states do have rights, that, you know, we should be able to nullify federal laws, and secession is always on the back burner for them. So it's going to just rear its ugly head every now and then, leading up to the Civil War. So, okay, let's go ahead and talk about the Maize Road veto. So the Maize Road is supposed to extend the National Road from Maysville to Lexington, Kentucky. And Congress passes this bill, but Andrew Jackson vetoes it, saying that, you know what, we shouldn't use federal money for this. States should, like, do this. Federal money, it shouldn't be used for these projects. So he felt they were unconstitutional. Now, it just so happens that this was also part of Henry Clay's American system. So in doing that, Andrew Jackson kind of like sticks it to Henry Clay a little. And, you know, let's face it, there's no love lost between the two of them. They hate each other. So 6 additional projects under this are going to be vetoed as well, which includes like building more canals and roads and all that. So yeah, Henry Clay's American system kind of like is dead in the water now, thanks to Andrew Jackson. So Henry Clay really doesn't like Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson really doesn't like Henry Clay. Okay, now here's another thing. The Bank of the United States was up for a recharter. And it got rechartered in 1816, you know, after the War of 1812. And so this new Bank of the United States goes up for a charter again during Jackson's presidency. And Jackson doesn't like the bank at all. This guy's kind of like Andrew Jackson in that. Well, Andrew Jackson is kind of like Thomas Jefferson in that regard. He doesn't trust the bank. Wealthy class elites are running it. You know, it's owned by individuals and not the government. It holds the government money. Paper bills were accepted as the equivalent of gold. And Andrew Jackson, like, hates himself some paper money. Like, he just hates it. That's why it's kind of the funniest thing that he's on the $20 bill. Which is like one of the most circulated bills in the nation. I think the treasurer was trolling Andrew Jackson just a minute with that. It's funny. It is funny because he hates paper money so much. And he hates a national bank like that so much. So I see you, Federal Reserve. Good trolling there. But anyways, yeah, he just believes in like gold or silver coins for currency, not paper money. So Jackson and his supporters are going to try to like get rid of the national bank, like not renew the charter and whatnot. They feel it has too much power, corrupted some of the members of Congress. So there's already enough people who hate Andrew Jackson at this moment that there's going to be a new political party emerging, which is the Whig Party. And so people involved are Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, and others who support the National Bank. So during the next election, they make it like a key issue for the campaign. Now, the bank is going to end up going out of business in 1836 because Andrew Jackson does win the next election against Henry Clay. So we already see the split in the Democrat-Republicans at this time. Now we've got 2 camps. We've got the Jacksonian Democrats for Andrew Jackson and the National Republicans for Henry Clay. But like we said, there's a new political party emerging. It's going to be the Whigs. So basically everybody else is going to join that. Even though we do have some third-party people involved as well, like the anti-Masonic party, who's, yeah, they're anti-Freemason, but really they're kind of more like an anti-Andrew Jackson party. And it's really funny. These guys end up nominating a Freemason to run for president for them. Lord have mercy. It's just a politics. What can I say, guys? Politics. So anyways, back to what we're talking about with the Bank in the United States. Now, when the bank does go out of business in 1836, Andrew Jackson is going to do something really dumb. He's going to take that money from the National Bank and he deposits it into preferred banks around the states, which we're going to call pet banks. These pet banks ended up loaning a whole bunch of money to people out west to do land speculations. And they didn't pay that money back. So the money in the Bank of the United States, from the Bank of the United States is going to go poof, gone during the Panic of 1837. And Lord, it's a bad panic. So when we get to Van Buren's presidency, guys, we're going to talk more in depth about that. But just know, it was caused because the Bank of the United States did not get rechartered. So keep that in mind. Also, we're gonna see Andrew Jackson at this point in time. His opponents really do hate him. I mean, this is one of the most famous political cartoons for Andrew Jackson, aptly referred to as like King Andrew the First. So it's born to command of veto memory had I been consulted. So you notice how, like in this political cartoon, he's stepping on a ripped up copy of the Constitution, a ripped up copy of the Charter for the Bank of the United States. On the ground, he has a book, which I believe represents the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, the judiciary of the United States. And he has the veto in one hand and like a scepter in another. So really, a lot of his opponents feel that Andrew Jackson truly has become more like a tyrant, more like a king by this point in time, because of how much he's expanded the role of the presidency, especially with the usage of the veto. Another thing that gets people thinking that Andrew Jackson is more like a monarch, like a king, like a tyrant, is what happens with Native Americans. So, with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, there's a lot of people looking at Western lands, and they want the lands occupied by Native tribes. So, a lot of people out west are going to be pushing for this, even a lot of people down south as well, because we still have a good number of tribes in the south. So, what's going to happen is Andrew Jackson is going to push Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act. And here's the quote from it. "It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government, steadily pursued for nearly 30 years in relation to the removal of Indians beyond the white settlements, is approaching to a happy consummation. 2 important tribes have accepted the provisions made for their removal at the last session of Congress, and it is believed that their example will induce the remaining tribes also to seek the same obvious advantages." So, in essence, what we're doing is removing Native Americans from their tribal lands. And we're kind of using this whole like excuse of, oh, they're uncivilized, let's leave the land for the white settlers. But one of these tribes that's targeted is the Cherokee. And the Cherokee is like the most civilized tribe like ever. It's one of the 5 civilized tribes in the United States. These guys are essentially like, okay, they have roads, they have schools, they have churches, they have representational government, they have farmers, they have cattle ranchers, and yeah, some of them own slaves. They're basically as white America as you can be. And so, they know their rights. They challenge us with the Supreme Court, both at the state level and at the national level. So, at this, one case in particular, the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the court says that the Cherokee were not a foreign nation, and therefore they don't have the right to sue in federal court. However, when this is challenged with the Supreme Court in the case of Worcester versus Georgia. The Supreme Court says, you know what, yes, the Cherokee actually is a sovereign nation, overturning the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia ruling. So, therefore, you can't kick them out of their land unless the Senate has formally ratified a treaty with them. So, now that the Supreme Court has ruled, you would think the President of the United States would enforce that ruling. After all, that's one of the roles of government for the President. They're supposed to enforce Supreme Court rulings. What does Andrew Jackson do? He defies it. He decides to say something along the lines of, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him carry it out. So he goes against this. He immediately sends the army to relocate the tribes. And what we have is a subsequent Trail of Tears. So in 1838, tribes, including the Cherokee, are going to be forcibly removed from their lands. And they travel all the way across to present-day Oklahoma, what we refer to as Indian Territory at that time. 1 in 4 are going to die along this journey. It is a harsh journey. I mean, they're cold, they're suffering, they're hungry. And, these tribes had worked alongside Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812. And here he is, kicking them out of their tribal lands because white settlers want to move in. So, amongst the tribes that were kicked out, we've got the Seminoles in Florida, we've got the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Sauk, and the Fox, all kicked out to Indian Territory out west. And so, yeah, this is definitely a dark part in our history, and one that was, Andrew Jackson was responsible for. So, there you go, guys. That's Andrew Jackson. You love him or you hate him. I mean, there's pretty much no in between with this guy. So, one more thing we're going to talk about, though, is the presidency of Martin Van Buren. Because a lot of the stuff that happens with Martin Van Buren is a result of Andrew Jackson's policies. So, before we get into Martin Van Buren's presidency, we need to understand the breakdown between the two political parties now. So, now that the Whigs have formed, the Democratic Republicans become the Democrats. Now, mind you guys, here's a disclaimer. The Democrats of Andrew Jackson are not the same Democrats that we see today. There's a lot of realignment with their ideologies that happen. So if you keep that in mind, guys, you won't get confused, okay? Even though they're the same party in name, they're not the same party in principles. So, here's what both parties stand for. The Democrats like local rule. They want limited government. They don't like big government. They want free trade. They want opportunities for all white males. They hate monopolies. They hate the national bank. They hate tariffs. They hate high land prices. And their supporters will still be from the South and the West, still be working class people. The Whigs are different. The Whigs are kind of like, they support the American system. They support the national bank, internal improvements, protective tariffs. They have a high distrust of immigrants because they feel that immigrants are responsible for crimes and stuff. Well, in the big cities. And so their supporters are going to be more your upper class elites, kind of like how the Federalists were. They're also going to be from New England. Protestants are going to join these ranks too, and urban professionals as well. So there are your two political parties. Now with Martin Van Buren, he's going to run for office under the newly, formed Democratic Party. And he's going to win this election against William Henry Harrison, which runs for the Whig Party. So, Martin Van Buren takes, by a narrow margin, the popular vote at 51% and the electoral vote at 58%. So he's kind of riding high on Andrew Jackson's popularity. Andrew Jackson was still, despite his, vetoing of everything, despite his non-charter of the Bank of the United States, and despite the Trail of Tears and people basically considering him a tyrant, he was still very popular amongst the common man. So, like we said, Martin Van Buren kind of rubs off on that popularism. Well, it rubs off on him, and he becomes president. But Martin Van Buren has to deal with the aftermath of the Jackson presidency. And what we consider the aftermath is basically what he does with the Bank of the United States. And Martin Van Buren has to go through the worst economic depression that we had ever seen that rivals the Great Depression. This one was bad. So the Panic of 1837 ensues. And what happens is Martin Van Buren does very little to combat it. He does nothing. Because we're still under this whole thought process of laissez-faire, leave it alone, let it fix itself kind of thing. Very little government intervention in the economy. So because of his unpopularity, he's not going to win re-election. But discussing this Panic of 1837 a little bit more, it's caused by Andrew Jackson not supporting the Second Bank of the United States, because that money that was put in those pet banks, like we said, it's going to be just squandered amongst speculators because they borrow that money from the pet banks, that were located in the South and the West. So, plus, in order to purchase land out west, you had to use gold coins or silver coins because Andrew Jackson really hates soft money. He really hates paper money. So with this whole specie circular going on, it's forcing people to rush these banks and try to get hold of gold and silver coins, which of course banks don't almost readily have on hand for everybody. So it's going to cause like this widespread financial panic. And so bankers couldn't back up the paper money with the gold. They went bankrupt. So it's kind of like this whole series of events that happens. Britain is also restricting the transfer of hard money to the United States. Cotton prices are plunging. Basically everything's kind of going to hell. So, you'd see the number of banks failing at this time, the number of banks after the panic. People are suffering in the streets, for real. So, and it's all kind of kicked off by, not re-signing the charter of the Bank of the United States, the pet banks using the money to loan to speculators, people going like crazy trying to get that gold and silver coin. It's a hot mess. So that's why in this next election, Martin Van Buren is not very popular when he's facing William Henry Harrison again. William Henry Harrison decides to own up to some of the attacks that Martin Van Buren is making against him during this campaign in 1840. So essentially, Harrison is a wealthy aristocrat, but Martin Van Buren says he's like an old has-been who hangs out in a log cabin and drinks hard cider. So instead of Harrison being offended by that, he kind of runs with it. And he's like, I like hard cider. I'm cool with log cabins. And so instead of being seen as this rich, wealthy elite candidate, Harrison now takes on that whole common man image, and instead Van Buren is seen more as the luxurious aristocrat, like we see in this political cartoon down here. So it backfires on Van Buren, and Van Buren ends up losing this election to Harrison. So, although Harrison's presidency is short-lived, though, I mean, this is our quickest president ever, guys, because at his inauguration speech, like, his inauguration speech was ungodly long. Plus, the dude wanted to, like, pretty much, he wanted to, show how manly he was, I guess, or just part of his nature, but he decided not to wear his jacket, and it was a very cold day. So he caught a cold, and it developed to pneumonia, and he died on April 4th, 1841, within a month of him taking office. So there you go, guys. That is President Harrison, and we'll kind of leave it off there because, yeah, we discussed a lot today, guys. We'll carry on next time with reform, which is another huge topic in APUSH, like, especially reform. Reform is a huge topic in APUSH. Jackson, not so much, but there's, like, so much of a hot mess going on with Jackson. We had to, like, flush this out, guys. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. We will catch you guys later with the spirit of reform, antebellum reform coming up. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.